Ethan's Revenge. I stood in the middle of the banquet hall, still holding the crystal plaque they'd just handed me. 36 years of service. Commendations, handshakes, polite applause. The kind of send-off a man dreams of. Then she walked up to the podium. My wife, Susan. She didn't smile. She handed me a manila envelope in front of everyone. Since you'll have free time now, she said into the microphone, you can read over these. It wasn't a card. It wasn't a letter. It was divorce papers. I didn't say a word. I looked at her. Then I looked at my kids, 2 grown adults standing off to the side. Neither of them looked surprised. Not 1 ounce of shock on their faces. In fact, my daughter wouldn't even meet my eyes. I remember the exact weight of that moment. The quiet, the clink of forks stopping midair, the silence thick enough to choke on. My name is Charles R. Bishop. I was 61 years old the day I retired from the Department of Transportation. I ran logistics for statewide rail projects. I moved freight, planned routes, optimized millions in federal contracts. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Because the woman I'd built a life with just ended our marriage in front of 117 people, including my boss, my grandkids, and my pastor. And I said nothing. No outburst. No demands. I walked off stage, placed the envelope in my briefcase, thanked the staff for the party, and went home. That was the last time I spoke to Susan. What nobody knew then, not Susan, not my kids, not even my brother who sat at the front table, was that I'd been watching everything for over a year. I'd known about him. The man Susan had been seeing. His name was Richard, Rick. He was 6 years younger, sold insurance, lived 2 towns over, and drove my old pickup truck. I'd sold it 2 years back. Guess who bought it? She thought I didn't know. But I did. I just never let on. I kept the routine. Paid the bills. Made coffee. Kissed her cheek. Pretended not to notice when she'd come home showered after book club. She thought she was clever. She wasn't. She was careless. And that was her mistake. Because when people think you're not paying attention, they get sloppy. My daughter, Natalie, knew. My son, Josh, too. I could see it in the way they acted around me. Polite, stiff, like I was some fragile old man who couldn't handle the truth. They'd chosen sides a long time ago. I didn't confront them. I didn't ask why. I just started preparing. 6 months before the retirement party, I opened a second account under a trust name. Shifted my pension deposits. Delayed finalizing the mortgage refinancing Susan had been pushing for. Told her it was caught in review. She never followed up. I also transferred the lake house to a holding company. It was in my name only. Paid cash for it in 2004. She never knew the deed had been rewritten. The bank statements went to a P.O. box. The insurance policy? Updated. Beneficiaries changed. Quietly. Legally. So when she served me those papers, I didn't panic. I didn't scream. I disappeared. Not the dramatic kind of disappearance. I just became unavailable. Moved out of state. Closed my accounts. Changed my number. Didn't tell anyone, not even my sister. And for 5 years, not a soul heard from me. Until one day my daughter called, begging for help. Her voice cracked when she said the words, "Dad, I need you." And what I did next shocked them all. When my phone rang, I almost didn't recognize the number. It was a Denver area code. I'd been living off-grid in a cabin outside Kalispell, Montana for 4 years and change. No address. No social media. No credit cards tied to my name. Just a prepaid phone, a diesel generator, and a dog named Ranger. I let it ring twice before I answered. The voice on the other end was shaking. "Dad, it's me. Natalie." For a few seconds, I said nothing. Not because I didn't know what to say. I'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in my head. I was quiet because I wanted her to feel the silence. Let it do the work. Then I asked one question. "What happened?" She broke. Not all at once. Just a small crack at first. Then the dam gave way. It was the house. Susan's house. My old house. The mortgage was in default. The roof was leaking. The HOA had filed liens. Rick, her boyfriend, had walked out 2 months ago and apparently took more than just his clothes when he left. Susan was sick. Cancer. Stage 3. She hadn't told anyone until she collapsed in the kitchen. Bills piled up. No insurance. Natalie and Josh didn't know where else to turn. They'd burned through savings, tried to get Susan into assisted care, but with the debt she'd racked up, no facility would touch her. Then Natalie said the words I never expected to hear. "We were wrong." I didn't respond. I knew this was part of the script. The part where the prodigal kids come crawling back. The part where the betrayed husband forgets the years of silence and betrayal, rides in like the cavalry, and saves the family. But I wasn't that man anymore. Not the one who asked politely to be respected. Not the one who smiled through gritted teeth while his own children lied to his face. No, I had rebuilt myself from the foundation up. And now they were calling for help. Natalie said Josh had tried to reach me too. Left messages on old numbers. Sent letters. I never saw them. Didn't want to. Then she asked if I could come back to Colorado. Just for a week. To help us figure things out. What she really meant was, fix the mess. I said I'd think about it. Then I hung up. For the next 2 days, I didn't sleep much. Ranger followed me around the cabin, sensing the shift. I walked the trail behind the ridge, the one that ends at the overlook. You can see all the way to Glacier Park from up there. That's where I made the decision. Not because I wanted to help Susan. Not because I owed Natalie or Josh anything. But because sometimes the best way to expose what's broken is to walk back into it. And burn it down properly. I packed a duffel bag, locked the cabin, and loaded Ranger into the truck. It was time to go home. Only, this time, I wasn't coming back as the same man they'd discarded. This time, I had leverage. And a plan. I crossed back into Colorado just before sunrise on a Thursday. The highway was quiet, the kind of silence I'd gotten used to. But the closer I got to my old neighborhood, the more the silence shifted. It wasn't peace anymore. It was pressure. The streets looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe I'd outgrown them. Maybe I'd just learned to see things for what they really were. I didn't go straight to the house. Instead, I checked into a motel off Route 36 under a different name. Cash only. Nothing traceable. I kept the engine running as I unloaded one bag, documents, printed statements, a flash drive with backup files I compiled over the years. My life's quiet insurance policy. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall for a long time, trying to remember when exactly it all started going wrong. There was no clean point of origin, just a slow erosion of trust that everyone noticed but no one mentioned. Back then, I believed in enduring things, in being the bigger person, in not making waves. Now, I believed in records, in paper trails, in preparing your exit before the ship sinks. That afternoon, I drove past the house. The yard was a mess. Overgrown grass, gutters sagging, paint chipping on the garage door. This wasn't just financial neglect. This was personal decay. A house built on shared memories, now collapsing under the weight of secrets. Susan wasn't home. Natalie's car was in the driveway. I didn't stop, just kept driving. Instead, I parked near the strip mall where Josh used to work summers. Sat in the truck and watched people come and go. Nobody noticed me, which was perfect. At 4 p.m., I pulled into the law office I'd used before retirement. Walked in, clean-shaven, calm. Asked to see Howard, my old attorney. He hadn't changed much. A little more gray, a little less patient. When I explained what I needed, he didn't ask why. He just nodded and started printing forms. I filed a petition for financial guardianship over Susan's estate, based on her medical condition and the evidence of mismanagement. Then I updated my living will and placed a freeze on the trust fund Susan didn't know still existed. Howard raised an eyebrow. "What are you planning?" I didn't answer, because this wasn't about revenge. Not yet. This was about setting the field. When I left the office, my phone buzzed. Natalie again. She left a voicemail, her voice tight, almost frantic. Susan had fallen again. They were taking her to the hospital. She asked if I could come. I didn't respond. Instead, I drove to a hardware store, picked up a burner phone, and activated it with a Colorado zip code. Then I found a quiet place to eat, a diner tucked behind a gas station where no one knew my name. I was back, but not for them. For the first time in 5 years, I was exactly where I needed to be, right in the middle of the wreckage. And the cleanup was just beginning. The hospital smelled the same way all hospitals do. Bleached tile, microwaved food, and old air trying to pass for sterile. I walked through the entrance with the quiet confidence of a man no one remembers until it's too late. Nobody stopped me. No one asked why I was there. I didn't check in. I already knew the room number. Room 314. East Wing. Susan lay motionless on the bed, a nasal cannula feeding her oxygen, and 4-line taped to the back of her hand. She looked older, smaller. The kind of small that happens when someone's been carrying too many lies for too long. Natalie sat beside the bed, her back to the door. She didn't notice me until I was halfway across the room. When she turned, her face collapsed into something like relief. I stayed standing. She didn't hug me. I didn't offer. Josh was in the hallway, pacing like a man whose guilt was finally catching up with him. He didn't see me at first. When he did, he froze mid-step. I didn't break stride, just nodded once as I walked past. He didn't follow. The attending nurse said Susan had fallen due to low blood pressure and dehydration. The scans showed metastasis. Liver. Lungs. Not much time left. A few months, maybe. I listened. Took the pamphlets. Said thank you. No emotion. Just data. Back in the room, Natalie tried to fill the silence. She talked about the bills, the debt, how everything spiraled after Rick left. How the reverse mortgage Rick convinced Susan to take out never got finalized. Something about a missing cosigner. I knew why. That cosigner was supposed to be me, and I never signed. I let her talk until her voice broke. Then I reached into my coat pocket and placed a folder on the table. Inside were documents, power of attorney forms, estate freeze requests, and a pre-authorization for asset review. She didn't ask what it meant. She just stared at it, her hands trembling. That night, I didn't go back to the motel. I drove to the lake house instead. It was untouched, the lawn overgrown, shutters hanging crooked, but the locks were still mine. The power still ran. Inside, it smelled like wood and silence. I lit a fire. Ranger curled up beside it like he never left. I sat at the dining table with a legal pad and a pen. Began listing what was salvageable. The house, the pension, the trust, the vehicles, what Susan had in her name, what she didn't. By midnight, I had a plan, and just one question left. Who benefited from Susan's decisions? Because someone always does. And I was going to find out exactly who they were. Then I was going to make them wish they'd never heard my name. Most people think destruction starts with fire or violence. They're wrong. Destruction starts with a name on a line, a misplaced signature, a notary stamp in the wrong hands. I spent the next 48 hours doing what no one expected. Reading property records, bank statements, loan applications. The paper trail Susan left behind was messy, but not unintelligible. Like most people in trouble, she'd tried to cover it with complexity instead of caution. The house was still in her name, but the refinancing attempts told me everything. She'd tried to pull equity out. Twice. Once in her name alone, denied. Then again, with Rick as a co-applicant. Only problem? Rick had outstanding debt. IRS liens. A bankruptcy from 2015. The application was flagged and kicked back. But not before he used it to access Susan's financials. He knew exactly what she had. And more importantly, what she didn't. That's when the purchases started. New furniture. Appliances. A truck. All in Susan's name. All paid with credit she didn't have. The bills were now in collections. A lawsuit was pending from one of the creditors. But what stood out most was the insurance policy. She'd taken out a new life insurance policy 2 years after I disappeared. Small. Suspiciously small. The beneficiary? Natalie. Not Josh. Not even a split. Just Natalie. That told me something I didn't want to admit. Susan had expected to die in silence. And she'd only trusted one person to benefit. Not Rick. Not even herself. Just Natalie. But Natalie hadn't told me that. She'd come crying, yes. But she hadn't said a word about the policy. Which meant one of two things. Either she didn't know, or she was hiding it. Either way, I needed clarity. So I went back to the hospital. Susan was asleep when I arrived. Natalie was reading something on her phone. She looked up, startled, like I'd caught her doing something she shouldn't. I didn't sit. I didn't speak. I just handed her a sealed envelope. Copies of the insurance policy, loan rejections, and Rick's debt history. She didn't even open it. Just stared at me like I was a ghost. Then I asked a single question. When did you find out? She didn't answer. But her silence gave me everything I needed. The next day, I visited a private investigator I'd worked with in 2008, when we were vetting contractors for a rail expansion. Old school guy. Didn't like email. Preferred hard copies and cash. I gave him Rick's full name, last known address, and the plate number of the truck Susan had financed. He nodded, took the cash, and said he'd be in touch. I left without saying more. Because this wasn't just about who ruined Susan. It was about who helped her do it. And that list was about to get longer. The investigator called 2 days later. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. Rick was living in a short-term rental under someone else's name, an old friend, now deceased. The truck was registered to a shell company in Nevada, a company that didn't exist before last year. The address on the registration? A UPS drop box in Boulder. Classic move. Dirty, but clever. He'd also pulled court records. Rick had a history, 2 restraining orders, 1 sealed case involving financial misconduct, dismissed without explanation. A pattern, hidden under paperwork and time. But here's what stopped me cold. He hadn't just left Susan. He'd done this before. Twice. 2 other women. Both middle-aged. Both with assets. Both ended up bankrupt. One of them had filed a civil case. Lost. Lack of evidence. The other died of a stroke before trial. Rick had been circling women like Susan for years. He wasn't sloppy. He was practiced. And Natalie? The investigator wasn't sure. No record of contact, but there were overlapping addresses. She'd sublet an apartment in Denver a year ago. Same building Rick used for one of his other aliases. Could be coincidence. Could be something else. I paid the man double his rate and told him to keep digging. Then I went to the courthouse and requested records for Susan's will. Nothing had been updated in the last 5 years, which meant she either never planned for this ending or someone else had. I left the courthouse with a pit in my stomach. Not from the betrayal, from the clarity. This wasn't a love affair gone wrong. This wasn't a wife who got bored and made a mistake. This was exploitation. Coordinated. Quiet. Slow. Someone, maybe more than one, had built a system around Susan's vulnerability, around her fear, around the hole I left when I disappeared. And now they wanted me to fill that hole again. Save the house. Pay the bills. Clean the mess. I wasn't here to save anything. I was here to settle accounts. That night, I drove to the house. Didn't park in the driveway. Didn't ring the doorbell. I sat across the street with the lights off, watching shadows move behind the curtains. I could see Natalie's silhouette in the kitchen. Josh walked past the window holding something. Maybe a bottle, maybe a box. They were preparing for something. A sale? A transfer? Didn't matter. Because I wasn't going to stop them. I was going to let them finish digging. Then I'd take the shovel away and leave them exactly where they stood. Buried. Together. The next move wasn't revenge. It was risk management. I contacted Howard, my lawyer, and asked him to draft a petition to challenge Susan's mental capacity at the time of recent financial transactions. Not to contest them outright, just to raise a red flag. That alone would freeze most accounts and delay any asset transfers. I wasn't trying to win in court. I was trying to slow things down until everything surfaced. Howard filed the paperwork. Within 48 hours, the bank flagged the mortgage file. The lien holder was notified. Title activity was frozen. Nobody could sell or refinance the house now, not without my signature. Natalie called the next day, left a voicemail full of panic. She said I was making things worse. Said Susan didn't need more stress. She never asked why I was doing it. That silence told me everything. I went back to the motel that night and opened my backup drive. Inside were copies of old tax returns, joint filings, property agreements. One particular form caught my attention, the transfer of ownership for the lake house. I'd moved it out of our joint trust years ago, but it was still tied to a bank account Susan didn't know existed. That account had grown. Dividends. Interest. Conservative, steady. $412,000. Enough to bury the mess or weaponize it. I chose the latter. The next morning, I made 3 phone calls. 1 to an estate attorney, 1 to a forensic accountant, and 1 to a contact in the state auditor's office. That last one was personal. A man I'd worked with on infrastructure audits back when I still wore a tie. A man who owed me a favor. I handed over a list of Susan's recent credit transactions. Told him to look for predatory lenders, cash flow fraud, anything that might trigger regulatory scrutiny. He didn't ask questions, just said he'd make some calls. That night, I walked the neighborhood. Not close enough to be seen, just enough to feel it. The tension, the desperation. I could sense it in the lights left on too late. The pacing behind windows. The urgency of people running out of options. That's when it hit me. They thought I came back to help. They thought I still wanted the family that walked away from me. But what I wanted, what I needed, was the truth, signed in ink and notarized. No more guessing. No more assumptions. Just a list of names, numbers, dates, and the exact moment everything changed. And once I had it all, I wouldn't need to shout. I'd just hand it to the right person and walk away. Let the wreckage do the talking. Rick showed up again the following Tuesday. The investigator sent me a still frame from a security camera, timestamped, geotagged. Rick was walking up the steps of my old house like he still owned it, carrying a duffel bag, wearing a coat I'd seen before. It wasn't expensive, but I'd bought it 10 years ago for myself. He'd gone through my life piece by piece and never imagined I might return to collect. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I reviewed the footage frame by frame, watched how he moved through the house, which rooms he entered, what he touched. He was comfortable. Too comfortable. That night, I pulled the trigger. The forensic accountant emailed a full summary. Rick had funneled over $90,000 through Susan over 18 months, disguised as consulting fees for a business that didn't exist. He'd used her accounts to prop up gambling debts and short-term investments under shell corporations. None of it was legal. All of it was traceable. And worse, Natalie had co-signed some of the transactions. Not many. Just enough to be implicated. Just enough to ensure silence. Josh. Clean. Surprisingly. Maybe he was guilty of ignorance. Or maybe he was smarter than I gave him credit for. Either way, I now had something no one else did. Motive, method, and proof. The estate attorney and I drafted a letter of intent to pursue civil action if any assets were transferred without my consent. We sent it certified to every financial institution tied to Susan's name. I didn't send a copy to Natalie. She'd get her soon enough. That same evening, I went back to the lake house. Brought Ranger inside. Built a fire. Sat at the table with a glass of water and no sound but the wind pushing against the windows. I pulled out the original footage again. This time, I didn't just look at Rick. I looked at Susan. The way she moved around him. Apologetic. Fragile. Caged. Not a victim of love, but of erosion. She'd made her choices, yes. She'd hurt me. Lied. Destroyed what we built. But what they'd done to her was something else. And suddenly, I understood my role. Not as a husband. Not as a father. But as the last man standing who knew where every lever was. I wasn't here to protect anyone. I was here to expose the architecture of the lie. And once it collapsed, they'd all have to live under the weight of their own decisions. Exactly how they made me live under mine. For 5 long, quiet years. It ended the way all things like this do. Not with screaming, not with fists, but with paperwork and silence. I walked into the hospital alone. Susan was awake this time, sitting up, pale against the white sheets. Her eyes found mine and stayed there. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. I placed a folder on the rolling tray by her bed. Inside, a printed copy of the forensic accountant's report, the statement of claim against Rick, the timeline of transactions, and Natalie's co-signed authorizations. Susan reached for it slowly, like it might burn her. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I sat down. She flipped through the pages without comment. Her hands were shaking. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor beeped. It was the only sound in the room. After a while, she looked at me, not with hatred, not with guilt, just exhaustion. That's when I told her the last part. The state auditor's office had opened a preliminary investigation into the shell companies Rick used. Civil penalties were inevitable, maybe criminal. Her accounts were frozen. The house would be reviewed by the court under the guardianship petition. And Rick? He was already gone. The investigator tracked his credit card to a motel 3 counties over. He left town the moment he saw the certified letters start arriving. Susan didn't ask about him. She didn't ask about Natalie either. Instead, she asked for one thing: time. I gave it to her. 1 hour. I left her with the folder. Walked the parking lot. Let the cold wind clear my head. When I returned, she'd signed everything. Power of attorney. Consent for legal action. Transfer of estate control. Not for forgiveness. Not for reconciliation. For peace. I left the hospital and drove straight to Natalie's place. She opened the door and froze. Said my name like it hurt. I didn't step inside. I just handed her a single envelope. Inside was a copy of the same file I'd given Susan, with one addition, a letter I'd written. It listed every time she'd lied. Every transaction she'd approved. Every silence she allowed. And at the bottom, I'd written one sentence. You knew. And you chose him. She didn't speak. I walked away before she could. That night, I returned to the lake house. Sat by the fire with Ranger. Let the quiet surround me. It wasn't over. There'd be legal proceedings, depositions, a sale of the house, the final hospice paperwork. But for the first time, the weight wasn't on me. It was where it belonged. On them. Exactly where I'd left it. Susan passed 3 weeks later. It was quiet. Peaceful, according to the nurse. No visitors in the room. Just her, a soft machine hum, and the slow fade of breath leaving the body. They called me, not Natalie. Because, legally, I was still listed as emergency contact. I didn't attend the funeral. Didn't speak at the service. Didn't stand graveside. I signed the release forms and arranged the final transport, then went back to the lake house and sat with the silence. It didn't feel heavy anymore. Just real. Natalie didn't call. Neither did Josh. I'd made it clear there would be no reading of the will. No division of assets. No emotional appeals. Susan had signed everything over. And I didn't keep a penny. I liquidated what was left, paid off the debts, transferred the remaining funds anonymously to a foundation that supported financial recovery for victims of elder fraud. Then I closed the estate. Not with a press conference or a family meeting. Just one signature. One final form. Rick was never seen again. The state's case quietly expanded, moving across counties and jurisdictions. His name would resurface, eventually. But by then, it wouldn't matter. He'd built a career on targeting the overlooked. This time, the overlooked had teeth. Natalie sent one message, months later. A single line in a blank email. I didn't know how to stop it. I never replied. Because she'd known how to start it. Josh, for all his flaws, found work again. Rebuilt slowly. I heard through the grapevine he moved out of state, took a job managing logistics at a port. He never spoke ill of me. Never spoke much at all. That suited me fine. The lake house stayed quiet. Ranger grew old with me. Winters were harder now, but the wood stove kept us warm, and the mail never brought anything I didn't expect. Some nights I sat on the back porch with a blanket across my legs, listening to the wind move through the trees, thinking about what was lost, what was taken, and what I'd taken back. They thought I'd disappeared because I was broken, but the truth was simpler. I didn't run. I repositioned, waited, watched, and when the moment came, I didn't shout. I didn't warn. I moved. Quietly. Strategically. And when the dust settled, they were the ones left holding the pieces. That's how you win wars like this. Not with noise, but with silence that strikes harder than any scream ever could. Real men don't explode. They exit. Subscribe for more power stories.